Thanks for having me. I gave a talk here a few years ago, invited by Benedita, and also attended one of your conferences in the past, and I'm very pleased to have the interaction because I think there's a lot of interesting synergies between what we're doing in our much less attractive campus than you have over here. Oh, is there a campus problem? Oh, but it'll be all right. Yeah. Are they building the monorail? Who knows? Stranger things have happened. I will start just by reminding everybody that the health system doesn't work. So, you know, there's all kinds of ways to praise it, and there are all kinds of achievements that it has, the U.S. healthcare system. But when you look at the hard, cold outcomes, the ones that are just uncontroversial, like life expectancy, or infant mortality, or rates of heart disease, things that are just hard, cold facts, we actually have very middling outcomes. And if you look at our expenditures, we're absolutely off the charts. So we're expending tremendous capital for poor results. And there are a whole host of reasons for that, which we could go into in detail some other time. I mean, one reason is that 95% of medical research is wrong. So this is the contention of a colleague named John Ioannidis, who used to be at Tufts, an epidemiologist, and is now at Stanford. And he has the most downloaded article in PLOS Medicine, an open access journal, which said this. And this got him coverage in Time Magazine and Atlantic Monthly and all over the place. And it's interesting because it might be true, it might be an exaggeration, but when I graduated medical school, or when I started medical school, day one, they told me that 30% of what they taught us would be 10 years from now proven to be wrong. And then they said, but they don't know which 30%, and then they laughed. Ha ha ha. And so, but so 30% was the dogma coming straight from Harvard Medical School, which is not radical in its thinking about research methodology and its issues at the time. And 95%, which is extreme, but when you start to look at the data and how there are things like publication bias, where you don't publish the papers that have negative results. Those are very hard to publish, and it's very hard to motivate people to go through that pain and the rejection and the resubmission of a study that had no particular finding. So we don't see them. And because of registries of clinical trials now, where we actually have the complete denominator, we can actually see that publication bias is very real. It's been documented in the last couple of years for the first time. There are propagation and persistence of false findings in the literature. Citation, you see one finding and they just get cited forever. There have been some really interesting studies tracing the life cycle of a single citation through the medical literature. And so particular facts are just wrong. I mean, and there are some really fundamental ones. I was stunned when I was still a fellow, I think, when a paper was published in JAMA that said that 98.6 degrees is neither the mean, the median, nor the mode of the average of the body temperature for people. It was just like, that's just from like some paper in the 1800s. No one bothered to check again until the 1990s. So, it's real. Studies are done on small numbers of patients, and on selected populations. And there's also an oligarchy of high-impact journals. So it's a real issue. And so what happens in the and there's also of course a funding bias. So what happens in the literature in medicine is that we tend to practice what's called, people are very proud when they're practicing evidence-based medicine. And evidence-based medicine means that I can quote all the articles that apply to you as I'm handing you the drug. And I can also humiliate the intern for not having read those articles in front of his colleagues on rounds. And that's what it's tended to mean. So the problem is that the trials that are being quoted were done on different populations. Often people were exposed to a drug, for example, for a very short period of time. They didn't have the comorbidities, the other diseases that are found in the real-world patients taking these. They were given for a particular indication, whereas drugs can be used by a doctor for any indication. Once they've been approved, you don't have to only use it for that population. So for all kinds of reasons, the population for whom we're giving the drug, doesn't resemble the population on whom it was studied for safety and efficacy. This is a big problem. So there's a shift, because you've heard about electronic health records. There's been a big shift towards the idea that we're going to use observational data and we're going to study all the patients and deal with a different set of statistical biases in the data than we are from applying information from trials to individual patients. And that over time there'll be a shift to something called a rapid learning network. Because what happens in healthcare now is if a particular patient has a good outcome or a bad outcome, the health system very stubbornly insists on learning nothing from it. Okay, so there is no, if you could die of a therapy and the next guy, 10 minutes later, they're going to give the same therapy to that guy, because there's no brain that's saying that this guy, unless it becomes a big unexpected thing and it's reported and it's invested, that's rare. I'm talking about the kinds of things that have people are dying and living and getting better or not getting better every day in healthcare. That information is in no way captured and used. So here's Francis Collins talking about a rapid learning network, which is really stunning, because the NIH has really never thought about healthcare delivery before. And they're being forced to begin to think about it. Francis Collins is the guy who sequenced the human genome at the NIH in the 80s, at the exact same moment that a guy named Craig Ventnor sequenced it with private funding. So, but he did it. And now he's the head of the NIH, and he's trying to realize the potential of genomic medicine. But the health system is so screwed up that it's very hard to even imagine how it's going to be implemented. I'll show you a little bit more about what I mean there. But he's now talking about this idea of learning from healthcare encounters. So it's a big year for Lincoln. So, you can fool some of the people some of the time. Well, let's just paraphrase and say, can we learn from all the patients all the time instead of from some of the patients all the time, instead of what we really do, which is just a couple of the patients, not that often. And it really is. I mean, well under 1% of patients are on clinical trials having their data captured for research and knowledge. So the question is, what does that mean? And so I'm going to show you a little bit about what I mean about the use of data, and then show you why we can't do it, why we can't do anything about it in today's health system. And then I'm going to talk about this App Store idea. So let's just say that we want to identify problems with medications and also medications that work. So we took data. This was after Vioxx. People remember Vioxx. Vioxx is a drug that was used mostly for patients with arthritis. It's an anti-inflammatory, COX-2 inhibitor, and very effective. But it turned out that there was information about Vioxx that was contained in the clinical trial experience that was not published in the New England Journal or revealed to the editors of the New England Journal, even though it was actually publicly accessible on the FDA website at the time. So there was a difference of opinion on whether that was a disclosure or not, and that resulted in a nice Wall Street Journal article, which no one ended up looking very good, either the people who published the glowing findings or the people who hid them, and who hid the adverse events. We looked at this with full knowledge that Vioxx causes cardiovascular events, both strokes and heart attacks. There probably was like 100,000 extra cases of heart attacks and strokes as a result of Vioxx being prescribed widely. Another also case where the indications were widened. It was approved for one thing and then marketed for any slight headache, take Vioxx. And so it was used very widely. So what we did was something very simple. We graphed myocardial infarctions, heart attacks, over time. Now, this graph just looks relatively straightforward. It goes up and then it goes down. But if you had a drug that was used that reduced myocardial infarction risk in a demonstrable way by 2%, you would have, that's a blockbuster drug. That's what the blockbuster drugs do. When you're taking statins every day, you're reducing your risk of a myocardial infarction by about 2%. It's not the way it's marketed, but if that's what the numbers needed to treat actually tell you. Here, the rate of myocardial infarction at Partners Healthcare, a major system that's known for its informatics, it's known for its data analytics, and it's also known for its cardiovascular clinical programs internationally. Here we have myocardial infarctions going up 18% and down 18% over this 8-year period, and no one noticed the entire time until we looked in about 2006 back at what had happened. So this was pretty stunning to people at Partners. Now, they were no different than anyone else in the country, and they were very nice and forward-thinking to allow us to publish this nonetheless, right? Because they wanted to be open about this. And actually, I'll show you what we think is causing this, but the fact that one of the major indicators one of the major outcomes in health was not being even tracked to the point of graphing it over time tells you that we don't use information in medicine very well. Okay, this information is there. It was already there. We didn't have to do anything special to collect it. Yes, Stu?
When you say this is 18%, it's
oh.
like tripling or doubling or tripling or something.
Yeah, let me see.
Am I misreading it?
Let's see, rate per year. Yeah, this is the, right, that. You're right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it did. You're right, it's more. So here we have, if you look at here, there's the monthly trends in myocardial infarction. If we had done essentially some basic forward prospective monitoring and started to blast myocardial infarction against things that might be causing it, COX-2 inhibitor introduction is actually right where you start to see this rise. If we had done simple statistical control process on it, that little line down at the bottom is 2 standard deviations out of statistical control. So we would have caught things very early using very, very simple techniques. And again, this is now single variable. And if you were to look back at the myocardial infarctions and COX-2 inhibitor introduction, the peak, all the inflection points and the peak are the same. And we also recreated with these data the odds ratios for risk in individual patients that you see in the biomedical literature. So the point here is that the data are there even now, but we have tended to be in a culture where we're not learning from them. So rapid learning network is really a prospective thing that we need to do. Here's sort of, this is my view of some of what we do at the FDA right now. A guy named Ben Rice, who you guys should meet next time he's in town too, did a very cool study where he actually did constructed a network looking at all of the different statins. And one of them, cerevastatin, which actually, again, this was done retrospectively, we knew caused something called rhabdomyolysis, which means muscle breakdown, potentially serious side effect, particularly for a drug that's being given to, if you're usually usually it's not a treatment, it's a prevention. And he did a network analysis, and here we have cerevastatin actually. All the other statins are actually pointing to cerevastatin. This was a way to do multiple comparisons while not getting into the multiple comparison statistical issue. There are ways to start to do this prospectively, and if you run this in a way that this is a sequential analysis, which just suggests how you might be able to run these things prospectively. And in the sequential analysis, you're continually adding in your information. And here you see the p-values dropping down, eventually below whatever threshold you're looking for. And so at some point, you'll see that your, and this is all the drugs versus cerevastatin, you'll see that your drug is now below a certain level. This is a way to, this is just one method for using the data as it accumulates all the time going forward. Yes?
So what comparison are you making over here?
Here we're comparing the, here's cerevastatin versus the other. It's like the other graph. You're comparing it against each of the other statins. And here we see cerevastatin now declaring itself early on, based on the data that's coming in, as dropping below this p-value threshold as being much more likely to cause rhabdomyolysis than the others. So it also you want to be able to use data from the health system to provide context for your medical decisions. So here we have an example of another really simple data point. This is just data from the emergency department, where the nurse, when you go into the emergency department, the nurse tells you, you tell the nurse why you're there. That's called your chief complaint, the main reason you're there. And the nurse writes that down. And she writes it down in scrawl, usually, or now, for the past 20, 30 years, that scrawl has been translated into the textual equivalent, which is just whatever abbreviation she uses locally. So she might write R/OMI. That's rule out myocardial infarction. Or she might write, vomiting, and she might spell it with 3 T's, And what happens is that's there, but it's captured electronically almost everywhere in these systems called admission, discharge, transfer systems. Those are the registration systems. So that's captured everywhere. So we took this thing, we did very minimal natural language processing to pull out syndromes of why the patients were there. And we looked at the respiratory syndrome of why patients are there for respiratory disease. And it turns out that just based on those chief complaints, we could produce this map of the influenza season that was better than anything the CDC was doing at the time. So the CDC, this is real-time data tracking influenza. And the reason we did it at the time was actually to try to detect bioterrorism, because they told us that anthrax was a problem. Anthrax presents looking just like flu at the beginning. So if you're going to detect anthrax, you have to understand flu. And if you're going to see a spike in flu-like activity that was not explained by the flu, then you'd want to think about other things. Why do you care about anthrax? Well, it's very deadly, and the problem is from the time you develop your flu-like symptoms till the time you are no longer salvageable is 24 hours. So it's just like a TV show, right? So you've got like 24 hours. So that's why all of a sudden DARPA and all these agencies, and eventually HHS, wanted real-time data. Now, the CDC provided data on the flu through a much more labor-intensive system, collecting primary data that was 3 weeks behind by the time it was all processed and collated and published in nice little graphs and mailed out in these paper pamphlets called Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. So this became very interesting. And we did some basic econometric forecasting techniques on it and could build a model, the RED model, which is essentially allowed us to do a sort of predictive medicine play. We could actually tell you how many patients are coming in to the emergency department tomorrow with flu-like symptoms within about 7%, based on historical data and trends and a few adjustments. And these are ARIMA methods. And so it let us do the model, and it let us detect abnormal things. So it turns out now, now this is the main way that flu is tracked, is with these kind of data, real-time data from the health system. But it's really very little data from the health system, very small amounts that trickle across into giving us a level of population awareness. So here we took a look at this also from the perspective of data sources. It turns out that the pediatric emergency data, and I'm a pediatric emergency physician, so I like this, come in earlier than the adult data, come in earlier than the CDC data, and come in 3 weeks earlier than people dying of the flu. So we published this. This was sort of in a statistical journal. But then I really was interested to figure out what are the policy implications of this. And I couldn't just go out there and say, hey, guess what? As in a press release from Children's Hospital Boston, guess what? When the kids start to get the flu, run for your lives. They're the canary in the coal mine we were hoping to find. And so we looked at it from another perspective, and we actually modeled this down. And it turns out that it's 3- and 4-year-olds who drive the flu epidemic every year, all around. What's that?
Can we just get rid of them?
Yeah, you could get rid of them.
Daycare centers.
It's a daycare center, so they're in there. Because if you were going to design the perfect incubator for Al-Qaeda for a worldwide epidemic, and you had an infinite budget, you would spend a couple years at the drawing board, and you would come up with, essentially, you design the preschool, and you would have these kids would be in there, and they're close together, and they've got mucus everywhere, and they have no sense of personal space. And then even better than that, their parents have they don't believe in the germ theory of disease, and so, because Americans don't believe in that. And so then when their kids are sick, they still bring them over to their grandparents, and then they kill their grandparents. And this is what really happens. I mean, you can see it in these data. And you can see it in these very simple data. These are just the lousy data that the patient tells the nurse. We published this study, and it had a very big impact. It triggered a tipping point. There were a few other studies that suggested that kids were very important in the spread of the flu, and we suggested that you should immunize 3- and 4-year-olds. This was a few years after SARS, where there were the super spreaders. We said, these kids are they're spreading it, just immunize them. And so there's actually some interesting emerging literature now that suggests that immunizing kids actually does help as well. All right, but I was saying population context. Now, if you look at something that's generally less serious than the flu, and certainly less serious than anthrax, but causes a lot of morbidity. If you look at strep, so we worked with Minute Clinic. Have you heard of Minute Clinic? There's these convenient care clinics that are, they're sort of a disruptive technology. They're like, for $50 you can get about 14 different conditions you can get checked out inside a CVS or near a CVS often. And it turns out that they have this huge data set on strep, because strep is one of their diagnoses. So 14 different conditions. Here's strep, millions of cases of strep. And unlike flu, it's got no particular problem. It's got no particular pattern of disease. And if whether I'm in my role as a pediatrician or a parent, if I've got a kid who has a sore throat, what I want to know more than anything else is strep going around? So we used the data from Minute Clinics regionally, all this local data, and we said, look, this is how clinicians think about strep now. They grade you clinically from 0 to 4. There's a scale. And 4 is like the most likely you're going to have strep. You've got like swollen glands and exudate on your tonsils and big tonsils, all that. What happens here is if you're a 4, but the incidence of strep in your area, something we call the recent local proportion positive, the strep in your area is low, if the incidence is low, even if you're a 4, you're more like a 3 in terms of your risk of strep. And if you're a 3, you're more like a 2. Now, because there are guidelines on how to treat people, simply adjusting this clinical score, which doctors don't think about anything else besides the patient in front of them. If you just think about who's sick around you, you save hundreds of thousands of unnecessary antibiotic courses per year in the US. And that potentially has a big effect on things like antibiotic resistance, and there's an increasing understanding of the impact of antibiotics on individuals too. And a course of antibiotics may not be as benign as it was once thought to be. You can also do something essentially prospective surveillance on individuals. If you have population level data, you understand a lot more about the surveillance of individuals. So here's, for example, adherence to medication is considered to be a $300 billion problem in the US annually. In other words, patients not taking their drugs costs $300 billion. Now, that's assuming that you believe that the drugs actually work. But assuming that they work, there's a big focus right now. And a lot of these are the preventive drugs, like statins, but other things. Assuming that they work, we want to be able to promote adherence. Here, we've published a paper where we could actually project in the future whether you're going to be adherent to your medications based on little subtleties in how you're filling at the pharmacy your medications now. So if you're running out of supply and not refilling and you're erratic at the beginning, we can actually identify you as a poor adherer. This turns out to have millions of dollars of implications for plan managers in, for example, Medicare Advantage plans, where they're now being rewarded for having adherent populations or non-adherent populations. So a little bit of predictive medicine can potentially go a long way. Let me just give you 1 or 2 more examples, and then I want to tell you about the App Store. This is another predictive medicine play. A guy named Ben Rice published this with me in the British Medical Journal. We can tell you if you're going to come at this emergency department visit based on a large data set, whether at the next emergency department visit you're going to come in with an episode of domestic violence, like injured. So we can tell you 1 visit in advance. So that's good, because, and we can identify you with a 90% sensitivity. So that's really interesting. High impact paper, important problem. It's a high impact journal, right? In other words, it gets a lot of citations. But I would argue that it's a low impact paper nonetheless, because to implement this within a health system is almost impossible, okay? It's almost impossible to take this software and this algorithm and to actually implement it in your health system. There's just no way to do it. You have to fight with bureaucrats in order to make it happen. And so the last thing I'll mention here is just that about what we want in a learning health system. We want to be able to engage the patient too. So here's a study by a guy named Bosch in the New England Journal. He shows that patients are much earlier reporters of their own symptoms. These are people on cancer drugs, and much more complete than anything that's in the chart, or than anything that's than anything that's in the chart. They're earlier and more complete. We did work, and Barbara mentioned this, on creating personally controlled health records to give patients copies of their data, to let them run apps on their data. Clayton Christensen from across the river thought it was a good idea, and we've had the privilege of working with him on some of these projects since. He's designed the idea of disruptive innovation, which means that low-end technologies can potentially move us forward. I'll discuss that a little bit later. The personal health record technology, at a meeting that Barbara actually attended, was interesting. We had this little open source project. I mean, it was well funded by the feds, but it didn't have a big footprint. We showed it to Google and Microsoft and some large employers, and they all took it and ran with it. So Microsoft took our code base, kind of against the open source license, actually, and just pulled it into the Microsoft Health Vault product, which is still kicking around. It's actually the one part of Microsoft Health division that still exists, is the personal health record. Google took our model, didn't use our code, and they ran with it, but then they deep-sixed it this year because they decided they forgot that they needed to actually get, that anyone could have a health record, but they forgot to actually do some work to get people's data into the health record. So you can have a health record, but it's empty. And then Walmart, Intel, and some large corporations formed a consortium and actually contracted with us to build it out. So we got to experiment with our record in hundreds of thousands of their patients. It's an interesting model, and I can tell you more about where it's going. We've been doing work with it in online social networks, and we're doing some crowdsourced information from online social networks. There are all sorts of channels out to the patient, but the patients are a key piece of a rapid learning network also. So let me just move into where I think we're going. So there's been a very large investment in what we call electronic health records. So I wrote a piece with Zach Kohani in the New England Journal a few months ago that called Escaping the EHR Trap. These electronic health records, if you look at them, you wouldn't like them very much. They're large monolithic pieces of software that were designed in the 80s, the 70s. The big companies have been building on these stacks. And because there's been a large investment in them, $48 billion investment by the federal government, they're being adopted widely. So Partners Healthcare, for example, is paying $1.5 billion for its for a system by a company called Epic. And that's about $500 million to Epic and about $1 billion to Accenture to tell them how to implement Epic. And the problem is that in our consumer lives as physicians, we're enjoying all the things that everyone else is enjoying. You know, we have best-of-breed technologies that we use from different companies. And no one company has dominated to provide us our complete platform. Even these so the most successful companies in the history of the world have failed to provide the complete platform, much as they would love to. Google does not provide me with all my software. Neither does Microsoft, and neither does Apple. What happens instead is, of course, I use iTunes for music, and Facebook for social networking, and Microsoft Word for word processing, and Google for search. And I use best-of-breed technologies. But in healthcare, what's happening is when these companies come in and they go into a hospital, they tell you it's very dangerous to integrate. Your doctors will be overwhelmed if you introduce even one more system. You must only use our system. So if you go to something like Kaiser Permanente, you'll see that they've successfully implemented an EMR, but their doctors are using the Epic version of email, that company's email system, which is some afterthoughty version of webmail, to do all their communication instead of an enterprise solution or something, or Gmail, something, a usable email system. They're documenting in text editors that don't have spell check. If they want to look up one of their patients, there's no search through the text of the EMRs, of the notes that they've taken. They have to remember the patient and the medical record number and the name and the date they saw them, and they have to look them up that way. They can't look up, oh, there was a kid, he fell off a bicycle, but he also had hemophilia. I should be able to put bicycle and hemophilia and pull up 4 notes and recognize that kid. You can't do that in an EMR. You can't do the most basic stuff. So here's the point. The point is that because of this $48 billion investment and the fact that it's very hard to get to the point of care. So when Obama administration was first taking office in 2009, we had written a piece called No Small Change for the Health Information Economy. We said, look, what really should happen is that electronic medical records, if you're going to invest in them, don't just invest in the off-the-shelf technologies now, but insist that these things look more like iPhone. So iPhone was 1 year old at the time, was a newer idea. But we had been working in sort of apps-based models of personal health records and things like that. We didn't execute like Steve Jobs did, certainly. But it really resonated with us. And we said, look, EHRs should be like this too. They should run apps. And the app should be substitutable. In other words, if you have an EHR and there's a module for managing medication, and an innovative company comes along and comes up with a better one, you should be able to delete the one that's there and put in a better one. Then these applications would compete with each other, and the systems could evolve, not just at the pleasure of the 5 companies that dominate the space. So you have 2 problems in EHRs. There's only about 5 or 6 companies that dominate the space, but there's also now about 900 different companies. So you have 2 problems. One is innovation is really limited to this block of 5 companies. And the second problem is that anything that you did want to do system-wide that was innovative, to get to the tails, you actually have to have it implemented 900 different times. And so those are 2 related, but ironically somewhat polarly different problems that are existing at the same time. So we propose is, can EMRs behave like iPhones or Androids in that innovators readily create and widely distribute apps across thousands of installs? So when we said this, we didn't mean mobile specifically. Mobile's cool and should be supported, but we meant just apps running on software. We didn't mean Apple particularly, although Apple thought we meant Apple, and so we got to have some really interesting conversations with this guy named Bud Tribble, who the CTO essentially, who designed Mac OS and iOS and the original Macintosh operating system. And he provided us with some very interesting insights into this issue of running apps. So what we did was we managed to have a project that got funded by the same guys that are spending the $48 billion, wrongly we think possibly, on these systems that as they exist off the shelf. Those systems probably can be evolved, and I'll show you that they actually can be used in newer ways than they're being used now. So when we got the grant, in 3 months we actually created a candidate programming API, and we took a look at an app. We said, well, we should develop an app. So there's this piece in Wired came out. You all know Wired. It was cool, 20 years ago. But they commissioned essentially visions of the future for health information technology, and they commissioned them in the space of laboratory information systems. So here's a laboratory information system of the present, right? It's still, they still print something on a crumpled piece of daisy wheel printer output, stuff it into an envelope, and then this is supposed to be how patients are supposed to get this letter, interpret it, and then magically change their diet and start exercising and just run out and they're whole new people. And so the question is this what we want? Obviously not. A guy named Dave McCandless is one of the people that was commissioned by Tom Getz, the editor of Wired, and he produced this picture. This is just a picture, and the picture is shows that we're taking data like your cholesterol and your CRP and your age and your smoking status and your weight, and we're giving you a tool to estimate risk, to see how risk changes as the underlying factors change, and and it's a tool that could be used by a doctor, it could be used by a patient, it could be used as a conversation between a doctor and a patient. So the idea here is, all right, here's a picture. So, and this picture made it into Wired Magazine's TED Talks and all this. So what we did was we gave this picture to our software engineer, and in 1 week he developed an app based on the picture. And it only took a week because he did pixel for pixel reconstruction. And so here's that same app running unmodified on 3 different systems. It's running on our reference EMR. It's running on a system called I2B2, which I'll mention briefly. And it's running on our personally controlled health record. It now runs in a whole bunch of other places as well. We decided then to have a contest. And we were encouraged by Anish Chopra, who is Obama's first chief technology officer. In fact, the US's first chief technology officer. He was a big fan, and it helped create challenge.gov. So we had one of the first health challenges on challenge.gov. And he publicized it very nicely for us in his some speeches and on his blog. And what happened was we got a winner. And the winner was one of these innovative companies. And the innovative company was actually almost brought to life one of the use cases that we had put into our grant, which is that a small innovative company wants to manage medications and can't integrate their software into the health system because they need to pull data out of electronic medical records, which don't have APIs. And then they die on the vine with doing door-to-door combat for each sale. Each sale is its own long, drawn-out, and often unsuccessful process. And once a chief information officer has committed to a $1.5 billion investment and got the board to go along with it, the company has a very strong influence on whether other software vendors will be allowed into the play. They have a very big say in what's going on inside the hospital. So an innovator cannot function as a company, and I showed you this British Medical Journal paper we had, which doesn't have a chance of being spread by us widely. So actually, we took, though, these EMRs that I've been bad-mouthing a bit, and we took the one at Children's, and we actually took this API we had developed and put it right on top of the Kluge API that was exposed on the Cerner system at Children's. And we went to the chief information officer and we said, what do you need? We have some funding. We'd like to do something on the home front. And they said, well, we need actually to have blood pressures monitored over time for our kids with high blood pressure, hypertension. These are kids with like renal disease and endocrine problems and heart conditions. And they said, and we need to do this. And by the way, we need to adjust it for percentile because your blood pressure has a completely different meaning depending on your age. So our clinicians, up until a couple months ago, had to click through the chart all over the place to find all these blood pressures. And then they had to adjust in their head or copy them onto a piece of paper to figure out. It's like trying to figure out if a kid's growing on their growth chart without a growth chart, right? The percentages matter. So here it is. This is just an app that runs these things by percentile and runs actually right in the middle of the electronic medical record. Okay, so within the patient context, single sign-on, all that kind of stuff. Here's this adherence prediction app running as an app inside the electronic medical record. Here's a medication reconciliation app developed at the University of Maryland that runs on our system that's designed to take two medication lists from different places and help reconcile what the patient is really taking. Here's an app by our contest winner that looks at the patient-friendly medication instructions on how to take your medications. Here's a growth chart app, newly designed. These things can be designed very rapidly. Here's an app that does immunization forecasting. It tells us how this actually reaches out to do decision support. So there's a few different key functions that we can build into these apps that are critical. This one reaches out to a cloud-based decision support, blasts the immunization record up to the cloud, gets in the cloud a rules engine runs, looks at the latest CDC recommendations for what immunizations you need, and returns right to the record the forecast of the immunizations you need next. Now, that is not rocket science, but there's no way to do that now. Even if you design a cloud-based rules engine, which people have done, there's no way to get the data out of the EMR and up into the cloud and then to return the results back to the point of care. So when I say point of care, this is the key. We can't influence what's going on in healthcare if we can't get back to the point of care. Right now, electronic health records in a non-apps modality don't get us back to the point of care. We actually were able to design some very dense data displays, very customized to specific specialties, and actually to introduce some semantically interoperable, very lightweight decision support. Things where instead of alerting doctors and paging them all over the place, this just turns a few portions of this display red so that they can actually see what they need to attend to. And there's all kinds of ways to introduce rules that way. This is a merge app that we did with our friends at Microsoft. This goes out to the patient's personal health record, pulls in their blood sugars that they've been keeping track of and storing in their personal health record, and merges it with the data from the electronic medical record at a single view at the point of care. So a whole bunch of companies are actually looking at the API, doing experiments with us, coming together in a consortium even to support the API, because we now need this API to be, it would be better, we think, if there's one API. We're not a company, so we're not trying to dominate for profit. We're just trying to make things better. And so we're getting some play with major insurers and pharma EMR vendors at trying to get this thing done. In the event that it doesn't all work within EMRs, or that EMRs take a long time to adopt, we have another strategy. Okay, we would rather be Batman, but we're willing to be Robin if we have to, in what we call the sidecar strategy. And in the sidecar strategy, we can actually run these apps not in these pieces of software called electronic medical records, but on data extracted from electronic medical records. Electronic medical record systems pull data from all over the hospital. They pull the data from the microbiology system, the radiology system, and the ADT, the registration system, and they surface it. So either after it's been pulled into the EMR, that those data can be extracted and loaded into a data warehouse, or sometimes even straight from those other systems before they get to the EMR. And the point is, most major medical centers have data warehouses. There's also a data warehousing project called I2B2, which has been pulled into use at 84 academic medical centers. And this is Zach Kohani's project. And we actually have the smart applications running on I2B2. So you can run these very same apps that I showed you on real health system data without any systems integration at 84 academic medical centers today. So that's the sidecar strategy. Now, why is that important? It's important because, as I was saying, Clayton Christensen talked about this idea of disruptive innovation. And I'm going to wrap up in a minute. But disruptive innovation is a low-end technology that is useful for large numbers of people nonetheless. So an example is the Toyota Corona. It got you from point A to point B, but it didn't have the features of the major auto manufacturers' products. It did not have the features of Mercedes. It did not have the features of General Motors cars. Didn't have things like heat and brakes and those kind of luxury items, but it worked. And so what happens is Toyota becomes a cash-rich company, and it makes its way up the food chain. As you know, that means Corona, Corolla, Camry, all the way up to the Lexus, right? All of a sudden, they're displacing Mercedes-Benz. And this, he described this phenomenon because it has happened in many industries. The PC did this to the mainframe computing companies, DEC and Wang. That PC, if you were a computer scientist or a biostatistician, you looked at this thing and said, that does nothing for me. And you went back to DEC and renewed your contract, and you had your data center, and you kept going in that way. But a lot of people could use those PCs for some really interesting things. Certainly, people at home would know. And so you have the little camera in your cell phone that appeared there in the mid-2000s. Did not worry the executives at Sony and at Olympus and Canon and Nikon. It worries them now. Okay. And so the idea is you can start to think about these things in advance too. And what is disruptive? We think that there are certain functions that need to happen in healthcare that are not performed by these other systems, but that we can perform in a very lightweight way. And that's the idea. So we have a diffusion strategy. There's the EHRs, and they are pulling this in to their products. There's Sidecar, which is run this on data warehouses. There's another strategy whereby the feds are finally requiring liquid data. Data has to come out of systems in standardized little chunks. And we have a system where we can receive those chunks and actually run the apps right on these little chunks of data, which requires almost no integration, but gets things going. So what can we do now with access at the point of care? There's all kinds of things. So if you want to do research, we can identify patients for clinical trials. We can identify clinical trials for patients. We can do pragmatic clinical trials. We can randomize people to one therapy or another. We can track outcomes at home during clinical trials, identify cohorts in large databases. This is one set of ways we can learn from going forward. Public health use cases. The CDC, if they want to respond to an epidemic and engage the health system in so doing, they have no way to do it. They could release one app that runs everywhere. Think about what you could do also with the FDA. If you want something like genomic medicine, how are you going to do that? None of the electronic medical record companies have genomic medicine data types or the ability to deliver genomic medicine decision support. Here's an app that takes data actually right from 23andMe and matches it up with your electronic health record data and shows you a whole bunch of information about your risk based on your SNPs. So that's the basic idea is, how can we move forward with this? We're at the point now we actually have a relatively stable API. We think we have a path forward to sustaining it. And we're developing our own what we call charter apps, which are sort of high-quality apps that populate the system. But we're very motivated the project is actually very motivated to support software developers in developing cool apps. And then we're looking to major strategic alliances to make sure that we are creating an API that does what the health system needs out of the data. And so we're very focused on this layer right now between the data and the applications that use it. So I'll hold it right there.
So how, like, if we want to get students involved hacking apps, what would they need? What would they have to do?
Well, we would very much like to see that. So one thing is we may have another contest or two, even starting in the next couple months. And so that would be one way if we could publicize that among your students. And we might have some contests with much bigger prizes than we've had before to get real things done. That's one thing. Two is we actually have, because there's actually this sidecar strategy is working, because we actually are running these apps right on I2B2 systems now, there is the possibility for real reward in seeing your applications used right away now. And there are some interesting opportunities that I think can arise there. Yes, Barbara?
Oh, just a follow-up.
Yeah.
Access to the data itself, sort of like experiments and
Yes.
IRBs and training, and
Right.
all of them.
Yes. So that's a very important thing. So we're looking into a few mechanisms to get people, software developers, real data. So if you're in a collaboration with, yeah, real, well, yeah, real is not, there's nothing better, more realistic than real. And so that's what we're actually trying to get. We can simulate data and all that. If you're working in collaboration with someone at one of the medical centers, then there are possibilities to get the real, sort of de-identified to a point data. We're also looking for ways to get data out to any app developer using the platform with real data. It's complicated, and we're working on those mechanisms too. Right now, it's through collaboration. Our reference container has about 40 real patients in there. It's not enough to model the whole health system, though, but it's enough to see if certain apps work.
And the B2 data warehouses, those also you have to go through a collaborator?
Those are through collaborators, yeah. Those are still protected by all the institutional HIPAA research requirements.
So what are the prospects for Epic itself to support this API?
So we'll see. Now, it really depends on their sense of citizenship. And we will broach the conversation with them probably a few months from now. When we first showed this idea to Epic in 2009, they told us it was an idea for at least a decade away before it was worth them thinking about it. Since then, they've actually made some they've had some press releases that they're opening up their own APIs. And what happens is when health EMR companies are big enough, they start to think just about their own ecosystem. So all we need to do to have a learning health system is just all our customers, we just use all our customers' data, and we have this. And so there is a lot of data in Epic systems, and so they may want to think about just Epic systems communicating with each other. But it doesn't solve the whole problem, because there's certainly, while they're dominant, they're certainly not everywhere. And patients want to have their data when they go to another health system. They want to be able to have some insight of the doctors taking care of them into the medications they're on and some of the basic treatments they've received. That's not happening in the health system now. And as an organization, for example, for a public use case like the CDC, trying to respond to an epidemic, or the NIH trying to do a clinical study, it would be nice if we could get to the point of care in a scalable way. So I think that there's going to be a tension within that company about what do they do just across their own installs and whether they're willing to play. I think that the public use cases are the strongest argument right now for why there has to be some commonality in an API. And so we'll see if we can bring that kind of pressure to bear. And there may be regulatory approaches as well, and we're exploring those too.
Another question.
Sure.
So we get to the point where there is this platform and different companies can write apps of various sorts. I'm wondering what happens. So medicine in general, there's always this overhead that
Yeah.
you want to introduce a new drug or a new
Yeah.
device or a new whatever.
Yeah.
All this regulation. So is the same thing going to be true here? Like before you can deploy an app, the government has to approve the app.
Well, that's a really interesting question as of now, because it's like last week and this week is when the FDA is doing its first set of deliberations, public deliberations on regulating mobile apps and what that means. So there was some interesting testimony submitted about that actually made the points that I was hoping people would make, which is that, you know, these things have to be able to evolve rapidly. So if you develop a drug and then you want to reformulate it as a capsule instead of as a tablet, you need a new approval for the tablet form. If every time Angry Birds wanted to release a bug fix and you had a little red number on your iPhone for the for apps that need to be updated, they needed to go through some FDA approval process. That would definitely slow down innovation. So the other problem for the FDA is that, as last I checked, they are unable to regulate safely either food or drugs. And the idea that they are the organization that will understand mobile apps is really odd, because there is not a single person in the organization who understands this at a deep level technologically. And so it is an interesting moment. My hope is that they don't try to grab too much territory too quickly. I think things will balance out, because it would be in a truly impossible situation. Imagine how can so for example, an electronic health record now, this billion-dollar system, it's unregulated. There is no regulation about what it does. There's no check and balance. The way an electronic medical record company sells it is, here's some software. You take full responsibility for how it works. Full responsibility. In fact, there was an interesting publication in JAMA where they looked at some of these contracts, and there are gag orders in the contracts, so the hospitals actually can't even display a screenshot. So if you Google around for screenshots of these systems that the federal government paid $48 billion in incentives for, you can't find even the screenshots of these things. And so that also means that if there's an error caused by the software, it's not reportable publicly. So it's an untenable situation. So some of that needs to be fixed, going all the way to the way of regulation. At the same time, they'll say, if you're creating, let's say that they're creating an EEG reader and interpreter. Okay, and so now doctor's going to, so an EMT is going to use this thing in the field, and it's going to say, you're in ventricular tachycardia, you know. Maybe that mobile app should be regulated as if it were an EKG machine, and it's a device that's being used.
But even then, they don't regulate the software. They allow for in-field upgrades without requiring any check of the substantive software.
Right, exactly.
So,
right.
it's the worst of both situations.
Right.
Until innovation happens, you don't actually.
Yeah. So so it's a great question. It's very timely. I'm sure if you just look at the newspaper over this next week, you'll see some answers coming in as to which way the FDA is starting to lean. But it's a very tough situation. I mean, I couldn't imagine trying to provide an assurance for even one app that it was doing the right thing. I mean, how much work would that take to prove that it's right every time, that it's using the right algorithms, it's handling the data properly, that the individual site that's going to implement it and configure the data underneath is going to do it the right way. And if all agencies, why the FDA, I'm not entirely sure. Because it's seen as a device. Yes.
I have
Hi.
several questions. I'm going to ask you, this is good, so you can pick which ones you want.
Oh, that's nice of you.
I mean, obviously, gigantic benefits for the individual patient, epidemiological research, public health, right, all this. So wonderful ideas. And I want to ask you questions about the privacy aspect.
Yep.
Several, I mean, who will own and control the data generated?
Yep.
Data in the apps.
Yep.
How that will work. Secondly, kind of how this will interface with protection of personal data
Yep.
and privacy. Then you get into a big data context, obviously, so you have the identification, but you also have all the re-identification worries of that. And then finally, something else I know that is close to your heart is a lot of this data will concern minors.
Yep.
So if you want to comment on all of that.
Yeah, so, well, let me just unpack that to say, for the idea of what I was presenting in the first part of the talk on the learning health system, those privacy issues are big issues, because on the strict privacy side, there's been a sense that the patient owns their data. I mean, on a sort of hardcore privacy advocacy side, there's a sense that the patient owns their data, shouldn't be used for anything without permission. On the pure sort of medical quality utilitarian side, there's the idea that, look, if you would not want to drive a Toyota if Toyota were not allowed to use the data it learns from manufacturing the car and from testing the car and from monitoring a car on the road to improve the manufacturing process so that the new cars are better. And so all those data that are produced in the process of care should be available to improve the healthcare system and to do research. So there's been a distinction made between quality and between research and between and then privacy kind of overlays both of those things. I think for the learning healthcare system, there has to be some understanding that as Americans, we can't afford to have a system that doesn't improve itself over data, with data. It doesn't do it now, but it has to learn to. And some amount of those data have to go into processes that are constantly improving the system. So when we sign our consents to treat, those have to contain some statement that the data, I think, are going to be used for improving healthcare. Now, how that relates to research is another set of questions. And right now, it's very hard sometimes to get at the right data for research and publication. And whether there really is a difference between quality improvement and research has left some people scratching their heads. So that's a very complicated issue that's being sorted out now. From the app's perspective, the issue comes in for these apps that run on electronic health records. It's really very similar set of privacy policies to what you have now within the hospital. It doesn't have to change very much from where it is now, unless the app developer intends to suck the data across the API out into their own systems and keep it. Now, if the app developer is keeping those data for some reason, then they probably need to become what's called a business associate at the hospital under HIPAA in order to participate in the provision of the care in that way. And there are formulations under HIPAA for how different companies interact. In the mobile space right now, where people are just downloading iPhone apps, so unrelated to what we're doing, and those data that people are entering are ending up all over the place with virtually no understanding on the part of the consumer who has their data and what they're going to do with it. So it's complicated, and it all depends on the context of where you're talking about it. But obviously, there need to be good behavior rules and expectations for these apps in terms of whether they're just, you don't want an app whose sole purpose is to suck out all your data just to create a giant database for some other purpose. That would have serious privacy implications. So there's the learning health system and the quality, where we need to, I think, use more data and learn how to do it. There's the apps and their good behavior and relationship between the app companies and the institutions that provide the EMRs. And then there's the sort of Wild West mobile health space right now, where there's no oversight or even transparency.